people of the internet, it's Amanda, and for today's video, I'm here to talk about Hana Nochi Hare. Now, I made tons of videos about this as well as Hana Yori Dango. I absolutely love the sequel to the Hana Yori Dango franchise, and it is also my first drama that I talked about here on my channel that sort of like kickstarted why I started reviewing dramas here in the first place. I have made other videos talking about character analysis comparing Domyoji and Kaguragi Haruto, but I feel like I'm going to repeat some of those observations in today's video simply because I want to talk about why I think Hana Nochi Hare is still the best reboot for Hana Yori Dango. Now, technically, Hana Nochi Hare is a sequel to the entire Hana Yori Dango storyline. It doesn't center on the F4, and therefore, the characters have their own character design, which is understandable. However, it still effectively rebooted that particular story to make it fit a more modern type of storytelling. Because as I mentioned before, that kind of like toxicity that F4 exuded as the main or like the core group of the story isn't something that will work way past 2010 or 2015. I feel like Hana Nochi Hare effectively did that and delivered that same kind of feel, but at the same time corrected the more problematic arcs of its predecessor. Now, the reason why I'm also motivated to make this video is because, as you've seen in my past videos for like the past couple of weeks, I've been reviewing F4 Thailand. And I do have some parts of it that I absolutely like, but I also have some issues when it came to the storytelling and how the characters are like, simply because I feel like given that we're in the 2021-2022 setup when the drama started happening, they are kind of, I'm not sure if they're kind of afraid to like push the limits of Thyme as a character. Not sure if it's like just to differentiate him from his predecessors, but at the same time, what made Domyoji, Daomingzi, Gujungpyo the kind of characters that they are is that they started off as this really toxic character that we kind of sort of like rooted for to change and to see to evolve in order for us to understand why he deserves to be the male lead of this particular storyline. And of course, there's still debates as to whether or not he really got the redemption arc that he needed, all of those things. I mean, for me, I've talked about this in my other videos where I think Domyoji Tsukasa, especially for the second season of Hana Yori Dango, definitely got that growth in a way, but for other iterations, it's still like it's still very debatable. But at the same time, like I feel like given how we've seen this character from the start and how he grew, it's kind of like understandable why that trope is a beloved trope, if you get what I mean. But again, it's not a trope that is fit for settings that is way past 2010 and 2015. Now, with that said, so Hana Nochi Hare. Now, again, as I mentioned, it's not a reboot, but rather a sequel. So it's understandable that they are gonna make like a different characters and different character dynamics for this one, but and I mentioned this in my older videos before, where my initial fear when I saw this was I thought that they were just going to, I don't know, play the same nostalgic tropes and storylines just so they can pass this sequel off. But what I found out as soon as I finished like the first episode was it was a massive improvement as compared to the dynamics in Hana Yori Dango. And I absolutely love Hana Yori Dango. It's a classic storyline. But Hana Nochi Hare definitely is the top tier storyline for me when it comes to like all of the versions and anything that has to do with like the Hana Yori Dango F4 universe, if you will. And that's also talking about like the different adaptations so far. F4 Thailand kind of reminds me of how some of the storylines in Hana Nochi Hare is like. It's just that I feel like given how we know how the F4 works and how the dynamic is supposed to be like, it's not supposed to be a correction of its past versions, but rather a retelling of the story in its unique way, in its unique manner. So it's kind of weird for me that the characters are already very self-aware for F4 Thailand, when in fact there's still no foundation for them to grow as they have in the story so far, if you get what I mean. Whereas for Hana Nochi Hare, we already get characters that have their own basis as to why they are. For example, Kaguragi Haruto, he idolizes the domyoji that he feels like is the domyoji that is perfect, that is good, that is righteous. It is the domyoji that he got to know as compared to the domyoji that we know from the original franchise. And because of that, he has this different characteristic to him that is following that particular path, and they were able to capture the violence or the cruelty that Hana Yori Dango posed, but it still fit in a more modern setting simply because C5 or Haruto's group is doing it for a purpose which he feels like is good for the school. Again, that's where my issue is when it came to like the newer reboots with Meteor Garden 2018 as well as F4 Thailand, where I feel like they are trying to push it for a fresher audience that may retaliate if the same trope happens over and over again. But I feel like, again, it could have worked if they were able to push the limits of Domyoji or the Domyoji character in their storylines, and still be able to like tell the story of how he was able to move past that kind of thing. Because here in Hana Nochi Hare, they were still kind of like cruel, but it's not the kind of violence that was happening in Hana Yori Dango. But again, it's still very unjust, and they were able to make it work. Now, with that said, so again, another thing that I absolutely am a bit iffy about is I saw a couple of tweets with regards to the scene from last week's F4 Thailand where Ren was making out with someone as well as with Kevin and MJ. They were like, they were with girls, and then Thyme was just there looking at his phone, probably obsessing about the fact that Goria isn't replying because Goria's phone is destroyed. And I saw a lot of people tweeting about that, praising that particular scene, blah blah blah. And the thing is, that's also a thing that is recurring in terms of like the other versions of Hana Yori Dango, where the male lead, because he's just so focused and in love with like the female lead, he doesn't look at anyone, blah blah, unlike the other three there. But for me, it's so past, like, I'm not particularly a huge fan of that thing, simply because again it puts the focus on like he's just good to like one person. You just focus on like one person and that's it, and it doesn't give the male lead a lot of dimension. And I understand that that's his character design. He is someone who puts his affection and focus on just one person. He's able to change a part of himself because of that one person, but he's still the Ore-sama character that he is. Now, and I mentioned this in my Why Kaguragi Haruto is my favorite male lead video, I think. For me, the correction of that in Hana Nochi Hare is that Haruto was able to look at other girls, be with other girls, be nice to other girls without him necessarily in love with them. Proves to show that there is a male lead that can follow the similar template of this domyoji character in a way, but can also be compassionate towards other people other than the female lead, and that makes him more likable. And another thing is, even for the second lead, Hase Tenma, he's not just a one-dimensional character that is fairly indifferent towards everybody else, but for some reason gives the female lead some special treatment to be nice, and that's why she fell in love with him. But rather for this one, we see that through Konoe's character, Tenma was also a pretty compassionate person and someone who's really, really kind and helpful And that's one of the reasons why Otto likes him in the first place. So again, there's this entire dynamic of how you can correct certain tropes to make it fit for a more modern audience. And I understand that, for example, they other countries who would want to tap into the Hana Yori Dango storyline, would want to adapt it, would simply cannot make a Hana Nochi Hare storyline work simply because, you know, it's a sequel and stuff like that, and it has to have that nostalgia factor for it to work. But I feel like that's the main issue in making an adaptation of this storyline in this late into the game. The reason why I think, for me, the later versions of Hana Yori Dango isn't exactly working anymore is because, again, it tries to water down the character of the male lead and the dynamic that he has with the female lead in order for it to work for a modern setting. Whereas, again, Hana Nochi Hare was already the perfect reboot or the perfect answer to everything that happened in Hana Yori Dango, and making it seem like it can stand alone as its own story. But if you know what happened in that particular original storyline, even if you've seen the other versions and not particularly the Japanese version, Hana Nochi Hare is still the perfect answer in terms of correcting those particular tropes while still creating characters that are very unique to this storyline. I think for me, what really capped things off in terms of what made Hana Nochi Hare the masterpiece that it is, at least in my opinion, is the insertion of episode 7. Now, episode 7 of Hana Nochi Hare wasn't in the manga at all. They kind of are a bit faithful in terms of following the storyline of the manga, but then episode 7 was completely created for the series. It was the episode after Haruto confessed to Otto and he was completely rejected, and Otto was thinking of moving to Momonozono. There's this entire thing where Haruto brought back the peasant hunting. Otto thought that it was because of her, but then Isa and Sugemaru told her that the actual reason for the peasant hunting wasn't exactly for anything else other than the fact that Haruto wanted to be a good leader for Eitoku, and it was to restore this leadership that he thought that the F4 had before during their time, and to correct that to make sure that Eitoku retains its prestige. So it was really more of like a character growth for Haruto for that particular episode, and I like that is when he started to own up to his own weaknesses, and it also showed this reversal of how we view male leads in not just in this storyline but in many other tropes, where he has to be this perfect person who has to fight really well, who's already really smart and eloquent and everything like that. And you have Haruto, who is good in his own manner, in his own ways, and has his own good qualities, but he feels like he's inadequate simply because he doesn't fit that particular trope. And that's very interesting because, again, it is a realization that you can create a really, really good male lead without following that particular trope of someone who's toxic but good at everything else, and that's why people tolerate and basically worship that particular trope. And also at the same time, create a male lead that is not just good towards the female lead, but with other people, but he's still able to express and show that his love is just for one person, if you get what I mean. Because here, I think the main emphasis is Domyoji as a character and his other iterations. He was able to be this person because he fell in love. He was able to become this person because he changed for that person, and that the dynamic was kind of like mutual in a way, but at the same time it was more of this idea that he has a different side when he's with a female lead. You know, he has this vulnerable, caring side. He's still this arrogant asshole towards everybody else, but it's valid because of his surname in a way. But he is good towards this one person. It's the whole special treatment thing that makes it romantic, and I understand because obviously it's still one of my most beloved series in general, and it's a common trope that we see in dramas. But Hana Nochi Hare was able to reverse that and say, hey, you can make a male lead that is kind to other people, who can be a little bit of like an arrogant ass sometimes, which Haruto is sometimes, and who can have all these like not perfect qualities and can be flawed and doesn't necessarily have to be good at everything and anything like that, and still make it likable, but still focus on a person that he actually likes and cherishes, and he can grow through that. And again, that's a reason why I feel like this is the perfect correction of the storyline that was Hana Yori Dango back in the past. It kind of like delivers that entire flow. And again, going back to episode 7 of Hana Nochi Hare, they recognized that the whole red card era during F4 was not a good thing, and that Haruto's generation doesn't know about it and idolizes the domyoji that he knew, simply because the whole red card thing was something that was bad but was tolerated by everyone. And that in itself is how you correct or call out the original storyline without exactly ruining the experience, you know? So I absolutely love that. It added to the realization of Haruto that the person that he's chasing after and he wants to be like isn't as perfect as he thought he does, and it was the stepping stone for him to accept that his own leadership and his own way should be something that he should be focusing on. And I absolutely love that, because again, it corrects the trope without necessarily watering it down. And again, it helps because Hana Nochi Hare is a sequel and not a remake of the same story. But in terms of rebooting the tropes to make it fit again for the modern setting, it is the perfect way that they could have done that. And I think that's the main reason why I'm having issues in terms of the storytelling of F4 Thailand recently, is because I thought they were going to push the limits of how mean time was, especially with episodes 1 and 2. And I was pretty excited to have that same feel when it came to Domyoji. But then it kind of like confuses itself in terms of trying to correct the old trope, but still trying to push the same arcs that happened in the original storyline. And that kind of puts a disconnect in terms of the emotional impact and the growth of the characters and how their relationships are to develop. And yeah, so that made me think about those things. And I know, I mean, for me, absolutely, Kaguragi Haruto is still my number one. Like, I haven't really loved a fictional character and a male lead like this in other dramas at all. I do have some that I really like and stuff like that, but if you're to ask me again, and I made a video about this, that kind of character, I absolutely like how they did it, because it kind of abolishes the idea of that toxic male lead, but doesn't really make him a weakling type of male lead that, you know, that feels like his only way of living is through a manic pixie dream girl, which I also don't like. So I absolutely love how Kaguragi Haruto's character was written. And it helped that because Yoko Kamio was also the one who created the storyline for Hana Nochi Hare, the manga. I like the development of the story. There are some arcs in the manga that I didn't actually like, but it is a very, like, Haruto and Oto's journey as a couple was very interesting for me. It is a different dynamic when it comes to Makino and Domyoji, but it still worked, and that's why I absolutely love it, and I will stand by it as the best reboot or the best thing that could happen in terms of injecting that F4 Hana Yori Dango nostalgia without necessarily watering down the impact as to why the original storyline was lovable. So yeah, I'm not sure if I made sense in this entire video at all. I feel like I'm just filled with like nostalgia and just love for that series. And I do have some issues with the tweets and some of the things that I've been reading about F4T recently. I am going to review the next episode tomorrow probably. So again, I feel like I'm just filled with all this energy, just analyzing things about the series and stuff like that. But yeah, but with that said, so that's it for today's video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Tell me down in the comments below your thoughts. Like, please give Hana Nochi Hare a watch if you haven't yet. And if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one.